The reading today comes from Matthew 14, verses 28 to 30. Lord, if it's you, Peter replied, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and beginning to sink, and cried out, Lord, save me.
Well, sorry about the technical difficulty this morning. I don't know what's going on. It's a new computer, so I guess we'll have to figure it out this week. So a few weeks ago, we started a series that I entitled Seven Lessons to Help You in Your Walk with God. And in this series, my goal is to expose you to 7 lessons that will grow your faith and enrich your walk with God. And that's really my hope. These are 7 lessons that mean a lot to me personally. Like they've really guided some important moments in my life. And so if you've been a Christian for a long time, perhaps there'll be some good reminders with these lessons. Maybe you'll be able to fill in some gaps that were there over the years. But if you've just begun your walk with God or in the first 5 years, I hope that you'll pay special attention as we work through these lessons over the next several weeks. And so the first lesson we talked about was the idea of developing a holy discontent. In order to grow and in order to advance, we have to have some sort of discontent for where we are. And this shouldn't be a discontent that leads to petrifying shame or guilt aimed at you or other people. This is a discontent that is based on the reality that Jesus has already made us worthy, but his sacrifice also makes transformation possible. So if you missed that lesson, I hope you'll get on Facebook or YouTube and catch up, because it's really the foundation for this series is that idea of developing a holy discontent in life. But once we've developed that holy discontent, we have to take steps. And the steps are, and the first step is to be intentional. And that's really what I want to unpack today, is just this idea of intentionality and the power of intentionality. So 25 to 30 years after he finished the Sistine Chapel, Michelangelo returned to the same space, the same chapel, to begin work on a fresco, which I don't know all that technical term. I had to look it up. What's a fresco? Well, it's a special technique that actually merges the wall and plaster and paint all together, and so it gives like kind of a texture to the painting. I didn't know that until I looked it up. But the plan was for this work to actually span the back of the chapel right behind the altar, and you can see a picture of it here. That's the finished work right behind the altar in the Sistine Chapel. So it took Michelangelo several years to finish it, but the amazing part about his work on this fresco was that he produced over 2,000 sketches trying to get ready to put this painting on the wall. It's called The Last Judgment, by the way, and it's widely recognized as one of the 12 master paintings of that age. Like, it's incredible. And you ask, well, why is it considered that way? Well, it's because the artist intended it to be something special, right? He did something like this with intentionality. It wasn't just a last-minute thing. It wasn't something that he, just kind of, did flippantly or whatever. I mean, he was extremely intentional about this painting. You see, there's really power. There's power in intentionality. And so we're going to be in Matthew's Gospel, Matthew chapter 14. And I believe we can find some really powerful lessons of intentionality in this very short story that if you grew up in church, you know this story. If you didn't grow up in church, this may be the first time, but that's fine. So in Matthew chapter 14, the start of the chapter is rough. if you've read through Matthew's gospel. John the Baptist is beheaded in the beginning of chapter 14. And if you know that John the Baptist is actually Jesus' cousin, like his relative, you realize why this is such a big deal, right? So not only has Jesus' cousin died, been killed, been beheaded, like a really tragic death, but he's also kind of Jesus' partner in ministry, right? He was preparing the way. He was the one who was out preaching in the wilderness. He's the one who baptized Jesus. Like there's probably this camaraderie that was going on between Jesus and John the Baptist, even though we don't know if they spent very much time together. We know that they were both working on the same thing, right? They were bringing the kingdom of God into the world in a new and different way that it hadn't been before. And the reason that this affects Jesus so much is that he's got to be thinking, oh my goodness, like John the Baptist was just simply obeying. I'm also simply obeying. And so even though he was God in the flesh, he was still human. And he still had all the fears and all the thoughts that you and I have when our bodies are in danger. And so Jesus has a really rough start to chapter 14. So let's start reading in 14 verse 13. When Jesus heard what had happened, that's the death of John, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. So why is Jesus going to a solitary place? Well, he's going there to mourn, right? He's going there to spend some time thinking and meditating and spending time with God. He wants to be alone, right? He wants to be alone. But the crowd somehow knows where he's going, and they run on foot all the way around the Sea of Galilee, and they meet him at the place where their boat was docking. I don't know how they knew, but somehow they knew. And the crowd meets him on the other side, and Jesus sees them, and he doesn't say, get out of here. He has compassion on them, and he heals their sick, and he feeds them, 5,000 men plus women and children. So a big event has happened. So let's pick up in chapter 14, verse 22. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead of him to the other side while he dismissed the crowd. After he had dismissed them, he went up on a mountainside by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but the boat was already a considerable distance from land, buffeted by the waves because the wind was against it. Now, I think it's really important at this point to kind of put yourself in the shoes of the disciples and of the apostles, right? Can you imagine what's going on in their lives, in their minds? I mean, Jesus is depressed. He's sad. His relative John is dead. He just wore himself out, wore himself to the bone. He was already tired. He was already worn out. He was going to be alone. And then all these people show up, and so he preaches to them. He feeds them. He heals their sick. He's like, they're like, what's going on with Jesus? And then he says, get in the boat and go, and I'm not going with you. Like, if you were a disciple at this moment, you'd be thinking, is he done? Is he having a mental breakdown? They've got to be worried about Jesus. And so I'm sure that as they get in the boat and as they're going across the Sea of Galilee, they're discussing what's going on with Jesus. He just told us to get in the boat and go. Is he mad at us? Did we do something wrong? We don't know. And so they're discussing this, and all of a sudden, as they get in the middle of in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, the wind starts to pick up. And if you know anything about that region, the Sea of Galilee is kind of in a deep valley, and the winds can blow up from one end of that valley and just become like horrific, like terrible winds. And so they're trying to get across the lake. They've put the sails down. They're rowing hard, and it's like they're on a treadmill, right? They're just sitting there on a treadmill, and they're worried and they're wondering. And then all of a sudden this happens. Verse 25. Shortly before dawn, Jesus went out to them walking on the lake, or on the Sea of Galilee. Whoa, you just can't really think about this, and not be freaked out, okay? Jesus starts walking on the water. And so, of course, we see that in verse 26. When the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they're terrified. It's a ghost, they said. He cried out in fear. But Jesus immediately said to them, take courage, it is I, don't be afraid. So I have to think about, like, how would I respond at this moment? You know, first of all, it's not natural to walk on water. Like, that's not natural at all. And I'd be like, James, John, Andrew, you better get to rowing because I've seen the movies. You know, you don't listen to the ghost walking on the water. Like, that's not what you do. I mean, he wants to possess you. He wants to eat your brains or something crazy. You know, we got to get away from this person who's walking on the water because that doesn't happen. But that's not what Peter does. Like, Peter believes the words, and he hears Jesus, and so he has another idea. I would not have been Peter, but this is what Peter does. He says, Lord, if it's you, tell me to come to you on the water. Come, he said. Then Peter got down out of the boat, walked on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid and began to sink, cried out, Lord, save me. So I think there's 3 really powerful lessons of intentionality that Peter's action teaches us at this moment. Really powerful lessons, and I hope that you'll hear this. I hope if you've got your bulletin open, you're taking notes, writing some of these things down, you won't remember them. Okay? You'll sleep tonight, and then you won't remember them tomorrow. So I hope you'll write these down, and if you don't write them down, I hope you'll go back and listen to this and write them down, because these are things that it can change your life. Okay, it really can. It can change your life. But the first thing that we can learn from this story is that intent must be followed by action. Intent must be followed by action. How many of you have had great intentions and never followed up? Like, I'm just going to confess, right? Yeah, everybody, right? And so Peter wants to walk to Jesus. He has an intention to walk to Jesus, and he steps out of the boat. If you've ever been on a windy sea, that is terrifying. That is terrifying. To step out of the boat into the waves that are just washing over the boat. Like, the waves are so strong that the boat is not moving. Like, that's how powerful the waves and the wind are. Back in 2015, when I lived in Wichita Falls, and I talk about, I apologize for all my cycling illustrations that I use, but it's a big part of my life. But I'm using cycling again. Okay, so back in 2015, as I lived in Wichita Falls, there was a 100-mile bike ride that happens there every year, and I really, really wanted to do it because I got a bike, a really nice bike, and I wanted to ride this 100-mile bike ride, and the furthest I'd ever ridden was like 20 miles. Okay, and so I wanted to ride this ride. So my intention was to ride that 100 miles, right? I intended to do it. But for that intention to come to reality, I was going to have to take action. And so I began riding about 4 or 5 times a week, riding my bike. I went to a little conference on how to ride long-distance rides, and I learned that you have to change up your training. You have to ride intervals, which is, you go intense really hard for about 2 or 3 minutes, and then you let your body recover, you slow down, and then you go real hard again. That helps build your stamina, it helps build your speed. I learned that you have to properly hydrate your body, because if you're going to be riding 100 miles, you're probably going to be riding, just depending on how fast you are, anywhere from 5 to 7 hours on your bike. So you have to learn how to properly hydrate. You also have to learn how to properly take in calories. That's important. You got to do that. And so I learned all these things, and I began riding 4 to 5 times a week. And that was the action that needed to take place in order for me to get to that place where I could do what I intended. And so when God or the Spirit shows something in your life that requires work or action, my question for us and my question for myself is, what do you do about it? What do you do when you have that addiction or that bad habit that is plaguing your life? What are you doing about it? If you don't know Scripture, if you don't know the Word, what are you doing about it? If you don't know how to pray, what are you doing about it? I mean, maybe God is impressing on you that you need to seek scriptures. You need to create an accountability group, or you need to seek out a mentor or a spiritual director or something, right? What are you doing about it? When God puts something on your heart that you intend to do, what are you doing about it? Intent must be followed by action. Maybe God or the Spirit impresses on your heart something that you need to do for the church. Or maybe something in your workplace needs work. Or maybe there's something in our community that needs to be done. Or do you have great intentions and then do nothing to follow it up? Intent must be followed by action. And then when you follow it by action, something really cool happens. And we can see it in the story. Acting on our intentions expands commitment and capacity. Notice I'm not saying it expands ability, okay? If you don't have a certain ability and you put tons of time and action into something, but you have no ability there, it's not going to just give you the ability, right? But when you put time into something, when you act on something, it expands commitment and capacity. All right, so for example, when I became actively intent on riding that 100 miles, what was amazing is that I found time to train. I found time to read. I found time to go to that little conference. There were certain balls that I dropped in my life so that I could reach that goal of riding 100 miles. You know, my TV watching went down. I didn't sleep in like I usually did. I got to work earlier. I left so I could leave early and train. I made time for group rides with friends. And so I trained, and what was amazing is that the more I trained, the more capacity I had. And what's amazing is that the longer I could ride, right? And the more I saw improvement, the more I saw things changing in my life, the more committed I became. Like, it's really amazing how it works. When we act on our intentions, it expands our commitment and our capacity. So I was actually able to finish that first ride in 2015, in August of 2015. That's a picture. Look at how little my kids are. Isn't that crazy? My son is now taller than me. So, but yeah, I was able to finish that ride. I was able to finish that 100 miles. And it was such a good feeling. Like it's amazing when you reach a goal, right? It's this amazing feeling. When you become actively intentional, your capacity and your commitment expands. You know, people sometimes want their capacity and their commitment to just start right away. But that's just not the way humans work. So Peter steps out of the boat, and what he can walk on is expanded. He walks on water with Jesus. You know, we often focus on Peter sinking, and we completely miss the fact that he walks on water before he sinks. Like, that's a really cool part of the story. And so when Peter acts on his intentions, he steps out of the boat and his commitment increases 1,000% because he's out of the boat, right? Like, he is committed. He is on the water. So if you have an addiction that needs to be dealt with, take action. You know, find a recovery group, get a sponsor, find an accountability partner, remove temptations. You know, and when you begin to take those steps, commitment and capacity will rise with each day and each week and each month that you begin to take action in that area in your life. If you want to be more intentional about prayer, take action. You know, read a book on prayer, set aside time to do it, talk to your minister about prayer, and guess what? Your commitment and your capacity will begin to rise. But that only happens when you take action. But here's the third lesson that we can see from this story about Peter, is that distraction will impact follow-through. Distraction will impact follow-through. When Peter is distracted by the winds and the waves, his follow-through, walking to Jesus, is affected. And he does begin to sink. And I don't have this on the screen, and I also don't have a little fill in the blank, but I think you should probably write this down if you're taking notes. The place The place that commands our attention holds greatest sway over our ability to follow through. Let me say that again, just in case you're writing that down. The place that commands our attention holds greatest sway over our ability to follow through. What are the things that distract you? What distracts you? I mean, there's the normal things, right? The things like sickness, death, money, power, 401k, retirement. You know, like we all get distracted by those things. And us preachers, we talk about those kind of things all the time. But let me tell you what I've noticed really distracts people. When people are treated unjustly, when you are treated unjustly, like when that person gets more vacation time than me, even though I work harder and have worked longer than they do, or when she talked about me behind my back, or when I got fired, but I've been working my rear off and that person over there is a lazy bum, or he cheated on me, or she cheated on me, right? Those are the things that I've noticed that distract people more than anything, is when injustice happens to you. And sometimes it's just the injustice of life, right? Like we look at our life and we're like, man, why have I been dealt such a terrible hand? Like why is my hand so awful? And we see the injustice of like that person over there seems to have everything that I don't have, and so we get distracted by the injustice of life around us. But it's important to remember that the place that commands our attention holds greatest sway over our ability to follow through. It's important to remember that. Something else that I've noticed that distracts people today is empty feelings. Empty feelings. And I have to explain that because that's my own, that's my own phrase that I've kind of come up with. You know how when you eat, there's empty calories. You know what I mean by empty calories? You can eat a donut or a Little Debbie snack, and you're like, ooh, that's good, right? But it's empty calories. And what's so frustrating about those things is that when you eat something like that, you're almost immediately hungry again. And you want more of that, sweet, yummy thing, right? That's kind of the way it works. They're empty calories. And what I've noticed is that we have empty feelings in our world, and we have a lot of opportunity for empty feelings. And what I mean by that is that we have things that we can do that bring immediate gratification to us, but they have no lasting or positive effect, right? Like we have all kinds of stuff. Like I'm walking around, and I just kind of like to look at people. And sorry if I'm creepy, but I like to. That sounds really creepy, right? Darcy's like just a little bit. But I like to look at people, and I like to see what they're doing. And I notice so often that I see people, holding their phone, and they're watching reels, and they just scroll, and they watch, and they scroll, and they watch, and they scroll. And it's just like a never-ending thing, right? Or I see people on their phones just scrolling through social media, right? And I also see people constantly trying to post the coolest, awesomest pictures on social media so they get lots of likes and all this stuff, right? And so we have all these things in our lives that give us that immediate gratification, but what lasting impact does it have? What does it do? We have things like watching porn. It gives you immediate gratification, but there's no lasting impact. And actually the lasting impact for some things like porn is extremely damaging, right? We like to watch our favorite shows and movies, and we sit there and it makes us feel good. But what's the lasting impact? Right? What's the lasting impact? And we can't forget that the place that commands our attention holds greatest sway over our ability to follow through with the intentions that God has put on our hearts and our minds and in our spirits to accomplish for Him. See, intent must be followed by action. And acting on our intentions expands commitment and capacity. But we have to remember that distraction will impact our ability to follow through. So the last three things on your outline there is just some questions to work through. And I hope you'll do this. Like, I really do. I really hope that you will do this. First of all, I hope that you will identify a place of intentionality in your walk with God. Identify a place where you need to be intentional about your walk with God. Whether it has something to do with Scripture, whether it has something to do with prayer, whether it has something to do with community, right? Whether it has something to do with, getting rid of a bad habit or an addiction in your life. Identify a place of intentionality in your walk with God. And I hope you'll write this down. Like, write it down, okay? And then just ask yourself, okay, what actions are needed? What does this prompt me to do? Because we've all done it. We've had great intentions and then never followed through. So what actions are needed? And if you're like, I don't know. Well, maybe you need to seek out a counselor. Maybe you need to, come talk to me. Come talk to, go talk to a trusted person in your life. Like talk to somebody who is ahead of you spiritually in their walk with God, and say, look, this is the place of intentionality. I don't know what to do. And maybe they'll have some ideas. Maybe they'll be able to pray for you. Maybe together you can come to some conclusion about what action is needed. But we have to identify that place of intentionality, and then we have to ask what actions are needed. And I hope you'll write down one or two actions that is inspiring you to do. And then you need to write down this: what is currently distracting you? What is currently distracting you? What is keeping you from following through? Because we all have it. And I would say that today, in our society, in our culture, our westernized culture, with the whole internet in our pockets, in a phone, I think we're probably more distracted than any generations previously, right? I mean, I remember the days. I remember the days not having a smartphone. I remember those days. I remember when I had to get on and click the dial up, and it would go make all these weird noises, and then when I'd click on a web page, I'd just be sitting there and waiting, and I'd be like, forget this, man, I'm going outside. I remember those days. Now you can just pull it up, and it's just like lightning fast. We have so many things distracting us. And I think it's important to identify what is keeping you from following through with the intentions that God has put on your heart. So if you're a journaling person, I would encourage you to journal it. If you're not a journaling person, take your bulletin home and just fill it out. Like fill up that page with stuff, and then take a picture of it with your phone and just look at it every week. Like remind yourself, this is what God's calling me to. These are the things that are distracting me. And you'll probably be like, oh my goodness, it distracted me all day today. You just don't know. But I hope that you will allow this story to just give you the strength and give you the tools to be more intentional about your walk with God. The song that we're going to sing now is a song called All to Us. And, this is basically saying that Jesus is all to us. And I recognize that there may be some people listening to this that you're still questioning, you're wondering, you don't know if you want Jesus to be all to us. Like you're still in that moment, that place where you're trying to figure it out. And that's okay. Okay, that's all right. But for those of us who have put Christ on in baptism, who have said that Jesus is my Lord, He is my focus in life. He is the one that I live for. He is the one that I, do life for. My hope is that this song will just kind of speak into your heart a little bit this morning, and maybe maybe cause you to question, is Jesus really all to me? Or have my actions, the things that I'm doing, the things that I'm spending all my time on, is that showing something else? I'm not saying everybody has to come, be a full-time minister, right? I will say that you do have to, you should be a disciple wherever you are, wherever God puts you, wherever you end up at, wherever, life takes you, whatever your job is, in your family, you're called to be a disciple. How does a disciple live out that in your life? Like we're all called to that. And so I hope that this song will really speak to you this morning. Let's stand, let's sing this morning.